Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark. We're in Esther, and we're going to be starting chapter 5 this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16. Thy words were found, and I did eat them. And thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, in the last part of chapter 4, we see Esther asking Mordecai to go to the Jews that are in Shushan and to pray and to fast, and that she would because she's going to be going into the king in 3 days, and she wants to be accepted by the king. She doesn't want to get killed, but she wants to go there on behalf of her people to help save her people. So now here in chapter 5, it says, Now it came to pass on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Now, it says here in verse 1 that Esther put off her clothes of mourning, and now she puts on her royal clothes. She wants to look as pleasant and as attractive to the king as possible. And before she goes to present herself to the king, she wants to make sure whether the king or not is sitting on his throne. So more than likely, Esther, instead of just going there under presumption, she probably asks someone to go to make sure if the king is sitting on his throne. And because she doesn't want to go there if he's not on his throne. So he is, and she goes, and she puts on her royal apparel. And then she's going now to present herself to the king. And it says here in verse 2, and it was so, when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. She obtained favor in his sight. It means God moved upon the king's heart to accept her. God moved upon his heart. And then it says the king held out the royal scepter in his hand. So he accepts her. He sees her, and she's standing there, and he hands out this, he points out the royal golden scepter to her. And by holding out the scepter, it means 2 things. It means, number 1, that her intrusion upon the king when not being asked for was forgiven. And number 2, it means that she was favored and she was welcome to come and to present her petition to him. Now, you may say, oh, how does it know the king is that Queen Esther is presenting a petition? Because the only reason why you would go before the king would be to maybe tell him some kind of an emergency or to ask for something, right? You're not going to you're not going to go and present yourself to the king unasked for and then say, hey, king there, what do you think about the price of eggs today, right? Or isn't it a wonderful day, king? Hey, it's a beautiful day. Hey, how do we go outside for a walk? No, you don't go in there and lollygag around with the king when your life is in jeopardy, right? So if you weren't asked for. So you were there to either as a emergency, or you were there to ask something from the king. So then it says here that she held out her hand, that the scepter was, Esther drew near and she touched the top of the scepter. So she holds out her hand and she touches the top of this golden scepter. And by touching the scepter, it means that she is thankful for her acceptance by the king. And number two, that she is showing reverence and submission to the king. So Esther comes and he holds out the scepter to her, that he accepts her, and she goes and she's thankful that the king, well, she better be thankful because her life is in her hand. She holds out her hand and she touches the top of the scepter as a action of acceptance by the king, thanking him that she's accepted by the king. And she's also as a meaning reverence, right? Reverence and submission to his authority. Now, Esther is going to the king. When Esther goes to the king, it's much like the sinner going before God. The sinner goes before God as one who has a law and the judgment of death upon them. Now, the king didn't know this. The king didn't know it. But Esther was a Jew, and she had the king's decree against her. And she was a condemned woman going to the king, right? And every sinner, when they present themselves to God, goes as one that has a condemnation against them. The sinner goes not clothed with their own filthy garments, but with the royal robes of God's righteousness. The sinner goes alone to meet his Maker, as all must do. God holds out the scepter, which is Jesus Christ, our mediator, between God and man, right? And as the means of contact between God and man, right? As the scepter was the means of contact between Esther and the king, so also Jesus Christ is our point of contact between ourselves and our heavenly King, between ourselves and God. Full acceptance is given the condemned sinner because of, number one, because of the royal robes, the robes of God's righteousness, because of the scepter, because of Jesus Christ, and because of a heart of love and mercy from the king. So it's because of the robes, the scepter, and the heart of love from the king. That's why Esther was accepted. She was wearing her royal robes, and she goes and he holds out the scepter, and she touches the scepter, and it's his love for her that helped give the acceptance. Now in verses 3 through 8 of Esther chapter 5, we deal with Esther's first banquet. Esther's first banquet. All right. Now, in verse 3, it says, "Then said the king unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther? And what is your request? It shall be given even to the half of the kingdom." Now, it says here, to the half of the kingdom. Now, this was what was usually said by the king or by a king to mean that you can freely ask for whatever you please. Okay? Nothing without reason will be denied thee. Does he really mean half of the kingdom? Probably not. But what it was a gesture of saying you are welcome to ask for what you want within reason, right? And it says, here's a poem that I have written in my Bible here, and it says, "Thou art coming to a king, large petitions with thee bring, for his grace and power are such, none can ever ask too much." Right? Let me say that again. "Thou art coming to a king, large petitions with thee bring, For his grace and power are such, none can ever ask too much. You know, we have liberty to ask of God for all that is in our heart. It says, ask. Jesus said, ask and ye shall receive, right? Ask and you shall receive. We are coming to a king. And when you come to this king, bring large petitions. Bring them large. Ask for souls. Ask for great things from this God. Why? Because his grace and power are such that no one can ever ask too much. No one can ask too much from our Heavenly Father, right? Jesus said, ask and you shall receive. Verse 4 says, and Esther answered, if it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. Now, Esther says, what she says here is the banquet that I have prepared for him, singular, him, all right? Now, it seems that she's making it sound that the banquet was for the king, all right? She's making it sound here that this banquet is specifically for the king. And this would appeal to the king's ego. Haman would be seen as an invited guest. All right? Now, this also is the hand of God. We see the hand of God in her saying, let the king come to the banquet that I have prepared for him. Appealing to, this is a banquet for me. Oh, and Haman is invited too? All right, well, this will be nice, right? So we see the hand of God in this because most of us would immediately tell the king everything, right? When we go into the king, we'd tell him everything. But God had a plan. Listen, God had a plan. And one of God's reasons was to humble Haman before Mordecai. One of the reasons why God would not let Esther tell the king everything right now was because God had a plan to humble Haman before Mordecai in chapter 6, verses 10 and 11. Now, before Haman's death, God wanted Haman to honor Mordecai. It did not change Haman's heart, but it forced an act of respect towards Haman. All right? So, this is what will happen at the white throne judgment. The unsaved will bow their knees and they will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. But it will not change their hearts. They will still hate the Lord and they will still despise their eternal doom. So just because God is going to humble Haman before Mordecai does not mean it's going to change Haman or Haman's heart. Right? And it's the same way with sinners. In the end, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord. Even those that hate and despise God, they will have to bow and confess that Jesus is Lord, and then they will be sent to the lake of fire. God needed to prepare the king's heart a little bit more so this is the reason why he delayed the real request. Right? This is the reason why she might not have known it. Esther might not have known, why she was putting it off for another, or that, the reason why she prepared 2 banquets. She might not have known. But God was in the background working because there needed to be a little bit more time to prepare the hearts of the king, prepare the heart of the king to give her her request. All right? Now, in verse 5, it says, then the king said, cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther hath said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. Now, it says the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther prepared, right? It was very unusual for men and women to be at a banquet party together in those days. It was unusual for men and women to have banquets together. Now, kings and his wives did not eat together as a family. So for the queen to invite two men, which was the king and Haman, to a banquet was a special event. You have to understand, you can't think of it in today's terms. This was an unusual request by Esther to have two men, even though they were the king and Haman, to come to a banquet specifically for them. Usually men and women had separate banquets. So this is a special event. And then verses 6 through 8, it says, And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, What is your petition? And it shall be granted thee. And what is your request? Even to the half of the kingdom it shall be performed. Then answered Esther and said, My petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king has said. Now, we do not know if on Esther's part it was fear, or maybe this was a calculated plan by her, or if this was the normal custom in the Oriental kingdoms to do it this way, right? To have two banquets. But we do know that God's hand was guiding the whole situation. We don't know Esther's part in this, all right? We don't know what she was thinking, but we now can see what God was thinking in it. We see God's plan in this whole thing, in Esther putting it off for one more banquet. All right? If it were in our power, we would have told Esther to speak now, right? We would have said, Esther, now's your opportunity. Speak. Don't hold back, right? You've got the king's attention. He's ready to give you half of the kingdom, right? But anyways, if she doesn't, she will miss the opportunity, right? If she doesn't speak now, the opportunity is going to be gone. But this would be to hurry God's plan, because we think he isn't working fast enough, right? If we hurry God's plan even one day, listen now, if we hurry God's plan even one day sooner, then there are things that need to be done tonight that won't be done. Tonight, the king must have a sleepless night. He must also read of Mordecai being unrewarded. Tonight, gallows must be built. The same people today will be different tomorrow. Essential things can happen in people's lives from one day to the next. Listen, refrain from the temptation to try to hurry God. I know it's in our nature to want to hurry God. God, you've got to answer this prayer. You've got to do it now. I see no end. You see no end. God does see the end. Right? God, I don't see how this can ever change before tomorrow. God, you've got You've got to do this now. It's got to be done now, God. If you don't do it now, it'll never, right? That's how we think. Come on, you know it. Anyways, no. Things have to take place tonight that need to take place. And God will make sure, and therefore he moves on Esther's heart to put it off one more day. Right? What's Lamentations 3:25? Lamentations 3:25 and 26. Let me get there. Lamentations 3:25 and 26. It says, the Lord is good unto them that what? Wait for him. Unto them that wait for him. To the soul that seeketh him. It is good that a man should both hope. What? Hope. And quietly wait for the salvation or for the deliverance of the Lord. Read those verses again. Lamentations 3:25 and 26. The Lord is good unto them that what? Hurry him up and tell him, God, hurry up. Get a move on, right? No. The Lord is good unto them that wait for him. To the soul that seeks him. That means seeks his will, seeks his heart for every situation of our life. It is good that a man should both hope and quietly wait. Quietly wait. Oh, that's hard for human beings to quietly wait for God's deliverance. For God's deliverance. Listen, God has a plan. And the hard thing for us to do is to submit to God's plan. When we see things going on around us, we think sometimes there's no hope. But with God, there's always hope. He needed one more day. God needed one more day because things had to happen that night. And unless it was put off one more day, the king would not have a sleepless night. The king would not read of Mordecai's unrewarded time there, right? The gallows wouldn't be built. So let's be patient and wait for God and trust him. Trust him. All right, we're going to continue next lesson in verse 9. But until then, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.